Hello, welcome to Dark Scary Stories. I am your host, and today we dive into one of the most terrifying and unexplainable disappearances in maritime history. Three lighthouse keepers vanished without a trace, leaving behind only mystery and unanswered questions. Prepare yourself as we uncover the chilling truth behind the Flannan Isles. On a cold December night in 1900, something happened on a remote Scottish island that would baffle investigators, challenge experts, and remain one of the most perplexing disappearances in maritime history. Three experienced lighthouse keepers walked into their place of work and simply vanished without a trace. No bodies were ever found. No clear explanation was ever given. What happened on the Flannan Isles on December 15th, 1900? That is the question that has haunted historians, paranormal researchers, and mystery enthusiasts for over 120 years. Before we discuss what happened, we need to understand where it happened and why this location is so significant. The Flannan Isles, also known as the Seven Hunters, is a small group of islands located approximately 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis in Scotland. These islands are incredibly remote and isolated. They are surrounded by treacherous waters, unpredictable weather, and are home to very little civilization. The islands sit in the North Atlantic Ocean, and the only structures on them were a lighthouse and a small group of buildings used to maintain it. In 1899, the Northern Lighthouse Board completed construction of a new lighthouse on Flannan Isle. It was a modern structure for its time, built with the latest safety features and equipped with everything three lighthouse keepers would need to survive on such an isolated location. The light was designed to warn ships of the dangerous rocks and treacherous waters surrounding the islands. This light was critical for maritime safety. Ships depended on it. Lives depended on it. And three men had been assigned to maintain it. The job of a lighthouse keeper in 1900 was not an easy one. These men had to live in complete isolation from the rest of the world for weeks, sometimes months at a time. They had to work in harsh weather conditions, maintain complex equipment, and keep the light burning through storm, fog, and darkness. But these were experienced men. They were trained. They were professional, and they were trusted with one of the most important jobs in the maritime world. The three lighthouse keepers assigned to the Flannan Isles in December 1900 were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur. James Ducat was the principal keeper, the head of the small group. He was an experienced lighthouse keeper who had worked at other stations before. He was considered reliable and professional. He had a family waiting for him on the mainland. By all accounts, Ducat was not a man prone to panic or irresponsible behavior. Thomas Marshall was the second keeper. Marshall was also an experienced lighthouse keeper with a solid reputation. He had successfully worked at multiple lighthouse stations. He was known to be calm under pressure and dedicated to his work. Donald McArthur was the third keeper, the assistant keeper. McArthur was also a professional with experience in lighthouse work. All three men were trained, experienced, and professional. These were not amateurs. These were not inexperienced workers. These were three skilled professionals who knew how to handle the demands of lighthouse keeping, even in the most remote and challenging locations. On December 4th, 1900, these three men sailed from the mainland to the Flannan Isles to begin their rotation at the lighthouse. They were expected to work for several weeks before being relieved by another team of keepers. It was a normal assignment. There was nothing unusual about it. They arrived, took over the light from the previous keepers, and settled in to do their job. For the first 11 days, everything appears to have gone normally. The lighthouse operated as it should have. The light continued to shine. Ships passing the Flannan Isles could see the beacon cutting through the darkness, warning them of the danger below. But on December 15th, something extraordinary happened. On that day, a supply ship called the Arctur was scheduled to arrive at the Flannan Isles. This was a routine delivery. Supply ships came regularly to bring food, materials, and other supplies to the lighthouse keepers. The arrival of the Arctur should have been an ordinary event. As the ship approached the islands, the crew noticed something unusual. The lighthouse light was still burning, which was good. It meant the keepers were still there, still working. But as they got closer and prepared to dock, they realized something was very wrong. There was no one on the pier to receive them. There were no lighthouse keepers standing by to help unload the supplies. There was no activity at all, just empty buildings and a silent island. The captain of the Arctur and his crew were experienced sailors. They knew lighthouse operations. They knew that keepers would normally be waiting for a supply ship. The absence of anyone was immediately alarming. They called out. They signaled. There was no response. Finally, some crew members decided to go ashore to investigate. What they found would become one of the greatest mysteries in Scottish maritime history. The main gate of the lighthouse compound was closed. The storm boards, wooden coverings designed to protect the building during severe weather, were still in place over the windows. This was highly unusual. The storm boards are only used during extreme weather. There was no extreme weather reported on December 15th. The weather, by all accounts, had been relatively calm. The investigators from the ship made their way to the main keeper's cottage. Inside, they found a scene that appeared frozen in time. A meal was sitting on the table, partially eaten. It looked as though someone had simply stood up and walked away from dinner, leaving their food behind. Chairs were overturned. There were signs of disturbance, but not signs of violence or struggle. It was as if the keepers had abandoned their meal and left in a hurry. But the most disturbing aspect of what they found was the logbook. The lighthouse keeper's logbook is a critical document. Every significant event, every important occurrence, is recorded in this logbook. The last entry in the Flannan Isles logbook, made on December 15th, read simply, "Storm warning note, apparent, all well, all well." Those were the last words written by one of the three keepers. All well. Yet everything was not well. The keepers were gone. They were simply gone. The crew of the Arctur realized they were facing an emergency. 3 lighthouse keepers had disappeared. They immediately reported this to the authorities on the mainland. By December 26th, the Northern Lighthouse Board had launched an official investigation. A relief crew was sent to the Flannan Isles to take over the light and to search for any evidence of what had happened to the 3 missing men. When the relief crew arrived and conducted a thorough search of the lighthouse and the surrounding buildings, they discovered more details about the mysterious disappearance. The doors of the lighthouse were locked from the inside. The logbook was on the table, just as the Arctur crew had reported. The living quarters showed no signs of violence or struggle. Personal belongings were still there, suggesting the men had not planned to leave. Their beds were made. Their clothes were in their places. It was as if they had stepped outside for just a moment and had been swept away. Perhaps the most significant detail was discovered in the kitchen. On the table, the remains of a meal were still visible. The meal consisted of breakfast items. But here is what made this detail so puzzling. The meal had been prepared and partially eaten, but one of the plates showed what appeared to be a large gash or damage. It was as if something violent had disrupted that meal. Outside the lighthouse, on the rocky terrain of the island, searchers found other evidence. The crane used to haul supplies up from the shore was in an unusual position. One of the crane's ropes had been secured in a way that did not match standard practice. Additionally, a sea chest, a heavy wooden container used for maritime storage that was normally kept on the shore platform, was found to have been washed up in a location that seemed impossible. It was found in a position that would have required an extremely powerful wave or force to move it. But nowhere on that island, despite extensive searching, were any bodies found. Despite searching the waters surrounding the island, no bodies were recovered. The 3 men had simply vanished. The disappearance of the 3 keepers prompted a significant search operation. The authorities knew that if the men had gone into the water, the treacherous currents around the Flannan Isles would likely carry their bodies far from the island. Search parties were organized to search the nearby islands and the surrounding waters. Fishermen in the region were notified and asked to report any unusual findings. For weeks, the search continued. Posters were distributed, inquiries were made, but nothing was found. No bodies, no remains, no evidence of where the 3 men had gone. It was as if they had been erased from existence. The fact that no bodies were ever found made the case even more mysterious. In cases of drowning or accidental death, bodies typically wash ashore eventually, especially in the relatively confined waters surrounding the Flannan Isles. But not in this case. The 3 men had disappeared completely. As news of the disappearance spread, various theories began to emerge. Some were more plausible than others. The first and most obvious theory was that the men had been swept into the sea by a large wave. The waters surrounding the Flannan Isles are known for sudden, unexpected waves that can rise dramatically without warning. A wave of sufficient size could potentially sweep a man off the rocks. But 3 men, all at once, and without a single body being found? This seemed unlikely, but it remained the most conventional explanation. The Lighthouse Board's official investigation concluded that the most probable explanation was indeed that the 3 men had gone out onto the rocks during a period of bad weather, possibly to secure equipment or check on supplies, and had been swept into the sea by a rogue wave or waves. The sea chest that was found in an unusual location was cited as evidence of significant wave action. The damage to the sea chest and its displacement was consistent with the kind of force a large wave could produce. But there were problems with this theory. The weather records from December 15th, 1900, indicated that the weather had been relatively calm. There was no report of a severe storm on that date. The last logbook entry, written on the day of the disappearance, stated that the storm warning was not apparent. If there had been dangerous waves and bad weather, surely the keepers would have remained inside the lighthouse, where it was safe. Another early theory was that the men had become ill or mentally unstable and had decided to abandon the lighthouse. Perhaps they could not handle the isolation anymore. Perhaps they had gone mad from being trapped on such a remote island. But this theory had problems too. All 3 men were experienced lighthouse keepers. They were professionals. They understood the job they had taken. And if they had decided to leave, where was their boat? There was no missing boat. The supply ships that came to the island came on schedule. There was no indication of the men trying to leave. Some local people on the nearby islands began to whisper about supernatural explanations. The Flannan Isles had a dark history in the minds of the local population. The islands were associated with superstition and legend. Some said the islands were cursed. Some suggested that something otherworldly had taken the men. These explanations, while dramatic, were not taken seriously by the official investigators. As time passed and no new evidence emerged, the case of the 3 missing lighthouse keepers became a permanent fixture in the collection of unsolved mysteries. The Northern Lighthouse Board kept detailed records of the investigation, and these records have been preserved and studied by historians and researchers for over a century. What makes this case so compelling is not just the disappearance itself, but the complete lack of explanation. We have no bodies. We have no clear evidence of violence. We have no confession. We have no witnesses. We have only a meal left unfinished, overturned chairs, locked doors, storm boards in place despite calm weather, and 3 men who vanished. In the years following the disappearance, various researchers and historians have examined the case and proposed their own theories. Some have suggested that the men were investigating unusual activity and fell into the sea. Others have suggested that the men argued, and one or more were murdered, with the bodies disposed of or swept away. Some have suggested that the men, driven to madness by isolation, took their own lives or killed each other. But none of these theories can be confirmed. None of them fully account for all the evidence. The case remains, to this day, one of the most perplexing mysteries in Scottish history. Let me summarize what we know for certain about the Flannan Isles lighthouse disappearance. First, 3 experienced lighthouse keepers, named James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur, arrived at the lighthouse on December 4th, 1900. Second, they successfully maintained the lighthouse for 11 days without any reported problems. Third, on December 15th, 1900, they disappeared. Fourth, a supply ship discovered their absence on December 15th when it arrived at the island. Fifth, inside the lighthouse, a meal was left partially eaten, chairs were overturned, and a logbook entry indicated all was well. Sixth, the lighthouse doors were locked from the inside. Seventh, no bodies have ever been found, despite extensive searching. Eighth, there is no evidence of violence or struggle within the lighthouse. Ninth, no boats were missing, suggesting the men did not leave voluntarily. 10th, the weather on December 15th was not reported to be severe, despite the storm boards being in place. These are the facts. Everything else is speculation and theory. In recent years, researchers and historians have conducted more thorough analyses of the available evidence. They have examined weather records, shipping logs, and the physical evidence that was preserved from the investigation. One notable finding came from researchers who examined the weather data more carefully. While the official weather reports indicated relatively calm conditions on December 15th, some researchers have suggested that the Flannan Isles, being so remote and isolated, could have experienced severe local weather conditions that were not recorded in the standard reports. The ocean around the islands is known for sudden changes and unexpected dangerous conditions. It is possible that a sudden storm or a series of rogue waves struck the island, even if this was not reflected in the mainland weather records. Additionally, researchers have examined the physical evidence more closely. The sea chest that was found in an unusual location bears testimony to the power of the water around these islands. If a single sea chest could be moved such a distance by the power of waves, then surely it is possible for 3 men to be swept into the sea by the same forces. But again, the complete absence of bodies troubles this explanation. Bodies do wash ashore. They wash ashore in similar cases around the world. The fact that not a single piece of remains was ever found remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. The Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery has endured for over 120 years. The lighthouse itself still stands on the remote island. It was automated in 1971, and no lighthouse keepers have worked there since. Visitors to the island can still see the lighthouse and the surrounding buildings. They can stand in the same rooms where James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur lived and worked before their mysterious disappearance. But their fate remains unknown. We do not know what happened to them. We do not know if they were swept into the sea by a rogue wave. We do not know if they suffered an accident. We do not know if they were the victims of violence or if they took their own lives. We do not know if they tried to escape and were lost in the water. We simply do not know. The three men remain missing, and the Flannan Isles remain a place of mystery and intrigue. The lighthouse that was supposed to guide ships safely through dangerous waters now guides visitors to one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Scottish maritime history. The disappearance of the three lighthouse keepers from the Flannan Isles on December 15, 1900, stands as a testament to the power and mystery of the sea. It reminds us that even in the modern world, with all our technology and knowledge, there remain places and events that defy simple explanation. The ocean can be brutal and unforgiving. Isolation can affect the human mind in ways we do not fully understand. And sometimes, mysteries simply remain unsolved. We may never know what happened to James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur. We may never understand what forced them to leave their meal unfinished, to overturn their chairs, to abandon the lighthouse they had been assigned to protect. The sea has kept their secret for over 120 years, and it may keep that secret forever. But their story lives on. Their mystery continues to fascinate and perplex. And every time a ship passes the Flannan Isles and sees the automated lighthouse beam cutting through the darkness, it serves as a reminder of the three men who disappeared into the night, leaving behind only questions and an eternal mystery.